Hey, hi gang. Here we are, week number 7 of the clampdown in our final chapter. In fact, the last part of our final chapter, chapter number 19. So we're going to start off with a little bit of review of the High Middle Ages, when things were good in the medieval period, and when things were not so good. But looking ahead to the modern era, beginning about 500 years ago. You see how historians like to round off to the nearest 500. So we're going to do chapter, what I'm calling 19.5, 19 and a half. When we last, the previous episode of this show, we talked about how things were getting good, right? In the, certainly after the year 1000, towns were forming, population was going up thanks to wide-scale stability, thanks to good climate, thanks to a lack of disease. Kings were putting together kingdoms, or at least princes and local leaders were putting together wide swaths of territory. The economy was improving. Culturally, we see the rise of universities and even new philosophy of scholasticism, popular piety among the people. And at the end of this segment, we'll do a bit of video on the rise of the Gothic cathedral, so even new forms of architecture to express kind of this optimism of the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, roughly from around the year 1000 to 1300. Then things get bad by the mid-14th century before we kind of, at least Europe, pulls out of it, survivors anyway, into the modern era. So, the increasing influence of Europe, the late Middle Ages, there we go. All right, after 1300 is a period of crisis and recovery. We will see some of this crisis actually caused by the revival of long-distance trade throughout the Eastern Hemisphere. That's Europe, Africa, at least North Africa, and Asia. Transmission of goods, awesome, right? The new Silk Roads, thank you, Genghis Khan. Ideas, spread of religion, spread of philosophy, spread of learning, Hindu and Arabic learning into Europe, but also the spread of disease. Oh, as we well know now, right, with a pandemic that's gone global in an age of air travel quite quickly. By the end of the era, by 1500, there'll be a renewal of expansion. Europe will survive and become strong and actually, through a bit of luck, begin to dominate much of the world, right? 1492, 8 years before the semester ends, so to speak, the parameters of the semester ends, Columbus traverses the Atlantic. And the rest is history. So we start off with plague in Europe. Map here, and there are a lot of maps like this on the internet. You see the plague, the darker the color, the earlier the plague hits. It had come from Asia, so off my map, along the Silk Roads. Basically, it's caused by a pathogen that lived in the stomach of a flea that liked to live in the fur of black rats, and the black rats like to get in commodities moving from Asia westward. Like what? Well, imagine silk. You're a little rat, you have some fleas, so what? You've always had fleas. You climb into a bale of silk, you hop on a cart, they put the silk on a boat, the next thing you know, you've probably had baby rats, right? And they're getting off the boat here, let's say in Venice, Italy, right? And the plagues move northward. You'll notice on this map, Scandinavia not hard hit. That's true. Also sub-Saharan Africa, off my map, the rats just don't do well in desert or tundra, or at least snow anyway, right? So you see it moving northward. For some reason, parts of Poland apparently were spared. How do we know? Looking at church records. A whole lot of people buried in 1347, 1348, 1349, okay? And as this doctor, so-called, shows, they had no idea what was causing it. So it wasn't a matter of shelter in place. Although, apparently the Pope did that. The Pope saw this thing coming and kind of closed the Vatican. No one was allowed to enter, no one was allowed to leave, and they got through it okay. All right, so some people could figure out shelter in place. Other people put on masks. Must be bad smells causing the plagues. They put on kind of these beaks filled with garlic, wands. I mean, there was no scientific knowledge, or very little scientific knowledge of this. There was certainly no knowledge of the microscopic world. Preceding the Black Death would be famine. So the climate gets bad. Climate had been good for a few hundred years. Food supply went up, population went up. Well, guess what? Now food supply is plummeting, and you still have a lot of people who go hungry. Those who survived had to pay more for their food, right? So a lack of nutrition. The plague's going to hit an already weakened population. Pathogens spread, as I mentioned, on these Silk Roads and sea routes eastward. From the east westward. Yes, we do notes, John. in the 1340s. A bacillus living on the backs of rodents like black rats will lead to a population decline 25 to 50%. Where's the 50%? In the cities, right? So density was an enemy in this pandemic as it will be in the current COVID one. People in the cities in contact with one another, fleas jumping off of me and onto you, biting us. That's not so good, okay? So the people in the more rural areas tended to survive. Did not move far north, as we just mentioned. What are the social effects? Well, a number of people died, especially in the cities. Once the plague had burned itself out, right? When a pathogen kills its host, when, gosh, I hate to talk about this in current events, but when a virus kills the human, the virus can no longer spread. The virus itself dies out. Although, yes, you epidemiologists will tell me viruses are not alive. I get it, right? But it'll be no longer operable. Okay? In this case, it was a bacillus anyway. There'll be a decline of serfdom. What does that mean? Well, if I'm out on the farm and my life is really awful because I have a landlord who owns my labor, right? This is not slavery, but not far from it. I'm not allowed to leave the farm. I owe the landlord my labor, my children's labor forever, apparently. But now, in the city, there's help wanted, right? Half the people in the city are dead. Once the plague is gone, they're looking for people like me. We go in and do some work. So if I can escape the landlord, bye-bye, I have a job in the city. If I can live in the city for a year and a day and not get caught by my landlord, I'm a free man, okay? And so are you, man or woman. We'll see a decline of serfdom. Why? Because to get the people to stay on the farms, the landlord's going to have to bargain. What do I need to do to get you to stay here, to work, and not to run away to the city where I can't catch you? Give us our freedom back. So serfs will become peasants. People almost enslaved will become poor farmers. And in some cases, demand higher wages. We see kind of an image here of a doctor who's like, I don't know what to do, and running away. Unlike our people, thank you if there's anyone watching on the front lines today. I know I've got a lot of essential workers as my students, so congratulations and thanks to you guys working in grocery stores and other really essential venues. Political and diplomatic travel. We will have missionary activity from actually France to Mongolia. A guy named William of Rubruck, sometime in the 13th century, made a journey all the way to the Mongol capital to try to convince, wasn't Genghis Khan, it was one of his descendants by this time, to convert to Catholicism. That didn't go all that well. Look, they didn't kill the guy, but the Mongols, saw the validity of many faiths, especially animism. And William of Rubruck came back home with a lot of knowledge about the Mongol world. Ibn Battuta, perhaps more famously, a Muslim scholar from Morocco, travels throughout the Muslim world. Here's the Friday prayers called in places from Tripoli to Cairo to Mecca, and really one common language, in this case Arabic. And he writes about it, very fascinating travel. So travel had opened up, but again, with that we will see the transmission of disease. Sufis will move into newly conquered lands. We've talked about the Sufis before, a bit more flexible. Yes. Yes, the Catholics a bit less successful in converting East Asians. Okay. So, ideas are moving, goods are moving, and disease is moving. Okay. The Mongol peace had allowed that long-distance travel. Ocean travel as well, especially on the Indian Ocean. So even at this early date, the 1200s, the 1300s, there's a demand for Indian spices especially, isn't it? That's the stuff that the Portuguese and even Columbus are going to be after. Columbus gets a little bit lost on the way. Cross-cultural exchanges. What else is being exchanged besides religious ideas, right? And kind of the old ideas of Aristotle coming back into Europe. Technology. So the magnetic compass and gunpowder, technologies from China flowing gradually into Europe. New foodstuffs like sugar cane. The Europeans just could not get enough of the sweet stuff. Okay, this is really going to literally fuel the Portuguese circumnavigation, not the right word, but the Portuguese exploration around the coast of Africa to India to try to find a seaborne route to India for sugar and spices. Actually, sugar was considered a spice. Cotton in from India, citrus fruits, Asian rice. Okay, so travel and trade all over the place, right? Mediterranean, over land, the new Silk Roads, but there are also sea lanes as well, okay? So this is the Eastern Hemisphere. You know, by design, we don't have the Western Hemisphere where most of us are located, depending. I don't know if I probably have no one watching this in Europe, Africa, or Asia, so you know, here we are in the Western Hemisphere. Yes, I do have a little competition today. Look, I had my cat, my dog, now I have my daughter as well. Need to be quiet. We're live on air, Jackson. We're live on air. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that. Okay. Yes, there's a lot to cry about. There's a lot to cry about. Why? Because look, times were tough. It was not only the Great Death. There was 100 years of war. In the middle of the bubonic plague, England and France go to war for 100 years. Are you good with numbers? It was even more than 100 years. And guess what? In this war between England and France, high-powered crossbows and gunpowder, and muskets and cannons. So, look, man-made misery to natural disaster. Out of this 100 years war, what did actually happen there? A little bit complicated for an introductory course. But look, the King of England claimed France. There was an uncrowned King of France who was not seen as legitimate until a 19-year-old young woman believed that she heard the voice of Jesus telling her that the King of France should be, in fact, crowned the King of France to lead an army to drive out the English. And somehow it worked. I mean, just amazing, right? The French troops believed her. They got out of the brothels. Oh, my goodness. A lot of... I can't cut this, folks. We can't do a take two. I'm just standing around. Yes, thank you for the gazute. Joan of Arc, right? Joan of Arc inspires the French to drive the English almost off the continent of Europe, and the French king is crowned King of France. Joan of Arc, by the way, is captured by the Burgundians and kind of given over to the English, where she is tried as a witch and burned at the stake. How dare you talk to Jesus without the church? Okay, she must be a witch. So we'll see the rise of a France. We'll see the rise of an England, the rise of a Spain. How about in Italy? Not yet. England will be comprised of city-states, some of them quite wealthy. Florence, banking and wool manufacturing. Bologna, Venice, trade with the East. These cities were wealthy enough to hire their own armies and to maintain their independence for quite some time. They will also lead to early capitalism. Okay? The wealthy families of northern Italy will fuel some of this recovery that we will call the Renaissance. Because what do wealthy people do? They buy stuff. Yes, they buy pepper, they buy silk, they buy other spices, they buy, well, not quite yet furs, but they buy things that other wealthy people don't have. And what can I have that you don't have if I'm a wealthy person? Michelangelo painting things for me or sculpting things for me. But maybe you hire Da Vinci, so art will be a great kind of outpouring of this Renaissance, fueled by the new wealth of northern Italy. We're going to take a break here. We're going to move into a little bit of video. Before I totally kind of moved too far away, the High Middle Ages, just before this period, was a great age of Gothic architecture. So a quick video on Gothic architecture, and then part two of this lecture, part two, or is it part four? When I'll come back afterwards, and we'll finish off, actually, the semester in chapter 19. Here we go, Gothic cathedrals. Okay, Gothic cathedrals. They had better technology than I do now.
Years ago, northern France, like most of Europe, was covered by forest. Trees dominated the land and the mind. But in the 12th century, monks built monasteries, as here at Fontenay. Abbeys like this used timbers for their roofs before encasing them in stone to make them last. This is Vézelay in Burgundy. Like other 12th century churches, it had become too small for the increasing number of pilgrims that now crowded through it. Vézelay was rebuilt and enlarged. These light spaces mocked the darkness of the forest outside. As other churches were rebuilt, a new style of architecture emerged, now called Gothic. This is Saint-Denis, near Paris.
Denis. It looks like Dennis.
Was so proud of his
All their great technology, their artistic talent, their faith goes into the buildings of these magnificent structures that still stand today 800 years later.
The heart of the sanctuary glows in splendor, radiates in splendor, and the magnificent work shines with a new light. It is I, Sujet, who have enlarged this structure. It was done under my direction.
This is in France.
Sujet's inspiration was mystical, a vision of heaven full of the color of jewels that gleamed through the dark night. On the site of the old abbey, he planned his new structure. It had slender, huge windows, a mighty roof. The eye would be
So gang, look at all that wood above the ceiling. That's what burned in Notre Dame, which was one of the great Gothic cathedrals, started in 1163. It's just like a forest of 800-year-old timber up there.
1996, Sujet's team of craftsmen began work. But Sujet soon faced a problem. Where to find the beams he needed to support a roof as large as he'd imagined. His carpenters feared that no trees tall enough were left in the shrinking forests. Sujet recorded what happened.
I got up early, set aside all my other work, took the measurements of the beams we needed, and set off for the forest of Yvelines. On the way, we stopped at the valley of Chevreuse to summon keepers of all the forests and the best local woodsmen. We questioned them under oath. Could we find any timbers of the size we needed? They smiled, and would have laughed if they dared. Nothing of that sort can be found in the entire region. Nevertheless, we began to search through the woods with the courage of our faith. Early in the afternoon, we found a tree big enough for the first beam.
12 great trees were found in Yvelines, enough to confound the skeptics, enough to build the dream.
They were carried to the sacred basilica, and we placed them with exultation over the new roof space to the glory of our Lord Jesus.